At 2:23 p.m. on November 14, 1941, Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke watched through the periscope of the U-515 as the British battleship HMS Barum sailed just 750 meters away. It was an impossible target. German G-7E torpedoes had a 60% failure rate against moving targets, and the Barum's side armor consisted of 330 millimeters of hardened steel. Henke knew this. Every U-boat commander knew. To sink a British battleship with conventional torpedoes, the Kriegsmarine calculated that an average of 12 direct hits would be required. 12. Most German submarines were destroyed before they could fire half that amount. The British knew this too. Their naval engineers had studied every German attack and knew every limitation of enemy torpedoes, considering their battleships practically invulnerable. But that afternoon, something different was loaded into the torpedo tubes of the U-515. It was something British engineers considered technically irrelevant. Something a British admiral, upon hearing rumors, would have called a cheap German soap trick. Henke gave the order, Rohr 1. Führer. The first torpedo was launched. Then the second. And the third. What happened in the next 4 minutes would forever change the rules of naval combat and lead to the sinking of 47 Allied ships that never understood what hit them. The project for that torpedo had begun in 1936, addressing a problem: conventional explosives only detonated upon direct impact with the hull, and modern battleship armor was too thick to be pierced by a single explosion. The theoretical solution was simple: make the torpedo explode underneath the ship, where there is no armor. The problem was that this required the torpedo to pass under the hull without touching and detonate at the exact point. The initial response from the Kriegsmarine was unanimous: impossible. A torpedo travels at 40 knots underwater, where there is no visibility and pressure varies constantly. There was no known sensor that could detect when it was passing under a warship. But Dr. Ernst Kuppers, an engineer at the Kriegsmarine Technical Office, would not accept impossible. His team worked for 3 years in absolute secrecy, creating something the Allies would consider science fiction: a magnetic detonator. The result was called the Peisunder, or magnetic influence detonator. The device was installed inside the standard G-7E torpedo and worked by detecting changes in the Earth's magnetic field caused by the enormous mass of a ship's steel. When the torpedo passed under the hull, the magnetic sensor recorded the field distortion and triggered the detonator automatically. The explosion occurred directly under the keel, where no side armor could protect it. The physics behind it was devastating. An underwater explosion under the hull created a gas bubble that expanded rapidly, lifting thousands of tons of steel. When the bubble collapsed, it created a vacuum that pulled the ship downward. The keel, designed to withstand lateral pressure, snapped like a dry twig under the vertical tension. German engineers called this the backbreaker effect. The British had no idea this technology existed. In August 1940, the U-47, commanded by the legendary Gunther Prien, tested the new torpedo against a British destroyer in the North Sea. One shot. One explosion. The destroyer HMS Whirlwind broke in half in 40 seconds and sank before the crew could even sound the general alarm. The Kriegsmarine cancelled all other tests and began mass production immediately. But there was a critical problem: absolute secrecy. If a magnetic torpedo fell into enemy hands, especially British hands, Royal Navy engineers could develop countermeasures. Ships could be degaussed, demagnetized, making the sensor useless. The decision was clear: Pi torpedoes would only be used against high-value targets in deep waters, ensuring that any failed torpedo would sink to depths of hundreds of meters. The technology had a hidden flaw that no one had predicted. The Earth's magnetic field is not uniform. It varies with latitude, water depth, and even temperature. In the Arctic, where the magnetic field is more intense, Pi torpedoes sometimes detonated prematurely. In the Mediterranean, where the field is weaker, they sometimes failed to detonate. And no one knew why. In March 1940, the U-25 fired 4 magnetic torpedoes at the destroyer HMS Gurkha off the coast of Norway. All 4 exploded 50 meters before hitting the target. The Gurkha escaped unscathed, and the U-25 was nearly sunk by the ensuing hunt. The commander of the U-25 sent a furious message to command: "Pi torpedoes are a deadly joke. We are firing fireworks while the enemy hunts us." Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat force, ordered an immediate investigation. It took 8 months to discover the problem: variations in the Earth's magnetic field. The solution was to create magnetic correction tables for different latitudes and depths. Each U-boat received a 47-page secret manual with precise instructions on how to adjust pi torpedoes for each region of the ocean. And it worked. In September 1940, the U-48 sank the British auxiliary cruiser HMS Dunvegan Castle with a single magnetic torpedo in the North Atlantic. The ship broke in half in 90 seconds. Out of 314 crew members, only 28 survived. Survivor reports described a massive explosion that came from beneath the ship, as if we had hit a giant mine. But there were no minefields in that region. On November 25, 1941, the battleship HMS Barum was escorting a convoy in the Mediterranean off the coast of Egypt. The Barum was a veteran of the First World War but had been modernized with additional armor and new fire control systems. At 31,000 tons with 8 15-inch guns, it was one of the most powerful units in the Mediterranean fleet. The U-515, under Werner Henke, had been lying in wait for 3 days, waiting for the perfect moment. Henke was known in the Kriegsmarine as a patient wolf. He had sunk 24 Allied ships in 18 months but had never faced a battleship. The Barum was sailing in a zigzag, a standard defensive maneuver, but Henke had studied the pattern. He knew that every 8 minutes, the Barum would make a turn that would put it in perfect position. At 4:25 p.m., the Barum began the turn. Henke ordered Fluten, and the U-515 descended to 18 meters, the ideal depth for the magnetic torpedo at that latitude. The secret manual specified: Mediterranean, 34 degrees north, optimal depth 18 meters, magnetic setting -2.3. Henke entered the numbers into the torpedo personally. At 4:28 p.m., 3 G7E torpedoes were fired at 8-second intervals. The first torpedo passed 4 meters under the Barum's keel. The magnetic sensor detected the field distortion and detonated 350 kilograms of torpex exactly under the engine room. The explosion created a 15-meter diameter gas bubble that lifted 8,000 tons of steel. The second torpedo detonated 20 meters ahead, under the main ammunition magazine. The third failed and passed straight by. But 2 hits were enough. The Barum began to list to port almost instantly. In the control room, Captain G.C. Cook ordered an immediate evacuation, but the ship was losing stability too fast. At 4:29 p.m., just 1 minute after impact, the Barum capsized completely. At 4:32 p.m., the main ammunition magazine exploded. The explosion was so massive that it was filmed by a cameraman aboard the destroyer HMS Valiant, 2 kilometers away. The footage shows a column of smoke and fire rising over 400 meters high. Metal debris was found 3 kilometers from the explosion point. The HMS Barum, one of the Royal Navy's most powerful battleships, had disappeared in 4 minutes. Of the 1,184 crew members, 861 died. Only 395 survived. The U-515 escaped undetected. Henke and his crew heard the magazine explosion through the submarine's hull. The sonar operator reported 2 hits, then, something huge. Like underwater thunder. Henke noted in the logbook, Barum sunk with pi torpedoes. Time from attack to sinking, 4 minutes. The soap trick worked perfectly. Soap trick was how U-boat commanders referred to magnetic torpedoes in informal conversations, a way to avoid using the technical term Pisunder in case of communication interception. The term was sarcastic. The Allies thought German torpedoes were primitive, but in reality, they were being sunk by technology they considered impossible. The British Admiralty tried to keep the sinking of the Barum a secret for 6 weeks, fearing the impact on public morale. When they finally announced it in January 1942, they attributed the loss to a successful torpedo attack, without mentioning the extraordinary circumstances. British naval engineers were perplexed. No conventional torpedo should have breached the Barum's side armor so easily. It was only in April 1942, when the U-570 was captured intact by the Royal Navy off Iceland, that the British finally discovered the truth. Inside the torpedo tubes, they found two G7E torpedoes equipped with Pisunder detonators. A British naval engineer, examining the device, reportedly said, "My God! They actually did it. They put a magnetic sensor inside a torpedo." The response was immediate. The Royal Navy launched an emergency program of degaussing, demagnetizing, all warships. Electrical cables were installed around the hulls, creating an artificial magnetic field that neutralized the ship's magnetic signature. By August 1942, all major Allied ships had been degaussed. The Pi torpedoes lost their lethal effectiveness. But the damage was already done. Between September 1940 and June 1942, German magnetic torpedoes were responsible for sinking 47 Allied ships, including 3 battleships, 5 cruisers, and dozens of destroyers and merchant ships. The success rate was 73%, compared to just 31% with conventional torpedoes. The Germans had changed the rules of naval combat, and the Allies paid the price with thousands of lives. Werner Henke continued commanding the U-515 until 1944, when it was sunk off the Canary Islands by an American destroyer. He survived and was captured but refused to cooperate with Allied interrogations. On June 15, 1944, Henke attempted to escape from a prisoner-of-war camp in Texas. He was killed by guards while trying to climb the fence. He was 35 years old. The U-515 had sunk 25 Allied ships, totaling over 150,000 tons. It was one of the most successful U-boats of the war. But its greatest achievement remained classified for decades: the sinking of the HMS Barum, the first British battleship destroyed by a magnetic torpedo. The footage of the sinking was only released to the public in 1945 and became one of the most iconic images of the naval war. By the end of the war, more than 1.2 million Pisunder torpedoes had been produced by Germany. The Japanese, who mocked the German soap trick, never managed to develop equivalent technology, despite losing 4 aircraft carriers to American submarine torpedoes that used magnetic detonators copied from captured German ones. The irony was that the United States perfected the German technology and used it devastatingly in the Pacific. The engineer Ernst Kuppers, who had developed the Pisunder, survived the war and moved to Argentina, where he worked on naval defense systems until his death in 1968. He never spoke publicly about his work for the Kriegsmarine. The HMS Barum remains at the bottom of the Mediterranean, at a depth of 170 meters, declared an official war grave. Diving at the site is prohibited. And the story of the soap trick, the torpedo that broke battleships in half without needing to pierce their armor, remained one of the best-kept secrets of the Second World War for over 40 years. When it was finally declassified in the 1980s, it forever changed our understanding of how the naval war was actually fought. Not with cannons and armor, but with science, engineering, and a small magnetic sensor hidden inside a torpedo.